starting chapter 4 today.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Nicholas Montano,
And this is Joey Massimito.
and we are the Learning a Process Model podcast, starting on chapter 4 finally today. Very exciting.
I'm going into a meaty chapter. Body's not a machine.
So the body and time. I don't think it needs any further introduction other than this is when the book gets hard, if it didn't feel hard already for anyone who's doing their their first serious read. Good luck. Joey, you want to take us in with the subheading and subsection?
Yeah. Into chapter 4, the body and time. 4a, a different concept of the body, not a machine. A, the body, when a process stops, is what continues. It is the other process. As soon as we have more than one process, the body is the other process, the one that is not stopped.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so subsection A is the claim, and this is going to be how a lot of this stuff is going to be laid out for the rest of this book. And what follows it will be kind of explicating the subsection. So going straight into the first paragraph, we will now define a stopped process. If some aspect of N number 2 is missing and the body does not die, it continues in an immediately different way. Some of the usual process will not go on. A distinction has been created. There is the stopped process and some other process which does continue. So something for me is we had in 3 stoppage as object, this kind of mutual implying of the non-iconic object to stopped process relationship, that as the cycle gets into the functional cycle, chapter 2 gets interrupted. Some previously participating non-separable environmental aspect is now conceivable by us, the spectator, as separate, as us the learner, as separate from the process. And now it's saying the body, when a process stops, is what continues. It is the other process. As soon as we have more than one process, the body is the other process, the one that is not stopped. So we now have the concept of processes. Now we have plural process. Continuing to the next, like a single sentence paragraph, the body is the new process, which does continue. And so I think for me, I'll immediately now then say, like, logically, there's a funny thing here. So that means the body is the process by default. But Gendlin doesn't define it that way. Gendlin defines it in this very technical way. As soon as we have more than one process, the body is the other process, the one that is not stopped. So even the concept of body doesn't seem to quite exist standalone, but rather as what continues when there's stoppage. It's a rather striking subtlety, and I don't even quite know the implications of it, but it's distinct to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm struck by the wording in that last sentence about the body is the new process and something about it continues in an immediately different way. Like the edges of understanding for me. Something about multiple processes, there's stopped, there's one continuing. But something about it being labeled as new or continuing in an immediately different way.
And perhaps continue?
Continue reading.
Yeah, I think so. This would be...
Yeah.
So I think our new scheme, I think, we'll still use the old page paragraph scheme, by the way. So I think technically this will be paragraph 1, 2, 3 on page 20. All right.
Paragraph 3. Until now, we had no way to speak about the seemingly separable thing that we ordinarily call the body. Now we have defined the body as separate, at least from the stopped process. I'll just go ahead and read next sentence. But in
Mhm.
what way does a stopped process exist since it is not going on?
Hmm. It's interesting based on what I was just saying earlier that the 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 first paragraph you just read was the seemingly separable thing that we ordinarily call the body. And I feel like he's again saying like now like doubling down on the like now we have defined the body as separate at least from the stopped process. And so again, body as standalone, not quite existent in his definite like that's like a hole right now. He's not saying whatever there's before. He's only saying like when there's a stopped process, right? So yeah, just this furthering of like that initial definition and that like slight technicality of the thing that's not there is continuing even in this pair. Like so, we are picking on an intentional feature of this definition by pointing that out.
Mm.
It is intentionally left almost undefined.
Yeah,
And then as you just read, but in what way, Red, does a stop process exist since it is not going on? And unless you have anything, Joey, I'll just take that into the next paragraph.
sounds good.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, paragraph 5, page 20. Let me first say that not every change is a stopped process. The changed occurrences might very well change the implying as it implied itself changed. Remember that. So implying is not a determined occurring. It is not some single way. Remember that too. But if the new occurring does not change the implying as it implied itself change, the implying will stay the same in those respects, and the stopped process will continue to be implied. So that feels good for me. Everything he's saying, he's said before. Um, but what he's drawing attention to is exactly that phrase. Not every change is a stopped process.
Mhm.
There could be all these changes that are happening in the direction of the implying as it implied itself changed, which is not predetermined, to be clear. There's potentially many ways of fulfilling it that are different, not predetermined. S- Only when there's a new occurring that doesn't change the implying as it implied itself changed. So it can change the implying, that's fine, but only when it's not when it has it implied itself changed, that the implying will stay the same in those respects. Yeah, that feels complete for me for that paragraph for now.
Yeah, I see a lot of things he's already said. My mind definitely hangs out on that first sentence, and I watch some fuzziness come in.
You watch some fuzziness come in with that first sentence for you.
Definitely, and kind of filtering it through the stuff that, like, I think I know, uh, and I think feeling okay with that fuzziness right now, but just seeing some of that come in.
Uh huh. So, carrying that fuzziness, would you like to read paragraph 6?
Yeah. Paragraph 6, what continues is different than if there were no stoppage. In section E, we will be able to discuss these differences. Right now, we can let them define the sense in which the stopped process exists as an occurring. Since it is stopped, it does not exist as itself. The stopped process exists insofar as what does continue is different. Now it continues alone without what is stopped. We can say that this difference in the ongoing process carries the stoppage.
Mm-hmm.
Nice setup.
Nice setup, huh? Say more. Say more. Say more.
You saying kind of carrying that fuzziness.
Oh, oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and
uh,
for me, that's crossing with, something about that immediately different way, the new process, something about it's being different because it's now carrying this stoppage, which is existent
yes,
in a certain way as carried by the now different continuing process.
by the now different continuing process. Yes. a difference that we're not able to discuss in terms of the differences, but we can at least discuss that this difference carries the stoppage. So that's where we're at, technically speaking, in terms of the model. And you said like, yeah, I don't, but you were like, good setup, and it's because this is in my normal way of thinking about things. Like this is the idea of carrying stoppage is like a normally functioning linguistic idea that I just say normally anyways. So it's kind of funny to like in a literal way see where that comes from,
Mm.
because that's how I use it now. In fact, so impacted have I been by this concept, which we will continue to drill into, to be clear, that I will sometimes like knowingly not choose to like have fun or do something fun or do like an escape when I'm feeling bad, because I will be like, I know that when I am done with whatever fun I just had, I will feel exactly as bad the moment I'm in contact with this
Mhm.
process again as I do as I'm feeling right now. Like maybe other things in my system will be different, but everything that is wrong right now in terms of like the stoppage I'm feeling, it's going to be exactly as wrong later.
Mhm.
And like that knowing sometimes gets me to like confront like, oh, it's not the escape I thought it would be. Like, oh, like sometimes passing the time or biding the time feels good because I'll have more resources. Like I'll have therapy, in 2 days, or see a friend or something. But other times it'll just be like, this encouragement to deal with it, because Gendlin gave me this idea that, hey, the implying will not change if it
Mhm.
like if it didn't move in the direction it implied itself changed. That stoppage is stuck right there.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like there's I don't know. I've seen it play out. Like it's a claim. How can you know that that's capital T true? You can't. But it's the how he's building his model, and I have found it
Mhm.
quite experientially verifiable, in my
Mhm.
opinion, in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm just enjoying this, like, "Oh, yes, you're fuzzy. Something is stuck. Go on.
Mm, go
Yes,
on.
go on."
Mhm.
There's the kind of the affirmation in it. Um, "Carry that.
Uh-huh.
Yes."
And I'll, carry that, yes. Yeah, and also what comes from me is, like, you'll carry it anyways, like, it's like it's like a holy burden. You're gonna carry your stoppage one way or another.
Mhm.
Um, so, let me just I wanna look over this once more. Hmm. Since it is stopped, it does not exist as itself. Powerful.
Mhm.
If it doesn't exist as itself, what does it exist as? The stopped process exists insofar as what does continue is different, but it's not continuing. And in that sense, it does not exist. Does not exist as itself. Why does it not exist as itself? That would be a good question to carry. I'll let myself carry that one. I have some inklings, but I want to let it flesh out. Um, yeah, and this is again this kind of rereading that is like, for focusers out there. This is like a soft version of focusing. Like I'm not going like super. I'm not like blocking out that much stimuli, but I'm using this language to like re-resonate. So, which is a funny way of saying that thinking is focusing. Basically, is another way to say what I just said. Is like to think is a
Mhm.
kind of focusing where you're representing like all the datums under consideration, and like you're using your felt sense as this lure to like clear through the bushes, represent to yourself more data that feels relevant to the. So like, yeah. So as I'm rereading this, I'm just getting that kind of sense of like, where am I in alignment and what is its self stoppage in my process. So
Mhm.
even saying that, into saying that, I'm gonna go one more time. So what continues is different than if there were no stoppage. We'll discuss these differences. So our process exists. Yeah. Okay. We can see. Yep. I'm ready. I'm carrying it. So I'll carry that into the next paragraph. A stopped process is an unchanged implying carried by a changed occurring. It is carried by the process that does continue by how that process goes on differently. And that congrues for me. It feels like explicating out of that felt sense, so to speak. Like it feels congruent in a way. It doesn't feel particularly new. It feels like clarifying rather than new. It's like this continuation, and it's bringing back in the implying that doesn't change as like this single phrasal concept, unchanged implying, this unchanged implying, and also this equivalence. By the way, a stopped process is, so equal signs that in your head, an unchanged implying, but not just an unchanged implying. It's an unchanged implying carried by a changed occurring. You can't have some unchanged implying just out in the ether. It's carried by a changed occurring.
Mm.
And to just weave back in chapter 1, occurring is concrete through and through. Occurring is environment. Occurring is in at the very least environments 1, 2, and 3. I'd want to say. So occurring is environmental. Occurring is concrete. And so the unchanged implying is carried by a changed occurring that itself is fully concrete. Just to be clear about that. There's some. Oh, please. No. Yeah.
I think something about these, just like the difference like, that gives me like a felt sense of like something about the way I feel when something feels off, when something feels stopped, and just that like vagueness about it. There's like something about it's like a background quality to it. And I don't, these last two paragraphs just like really resonate with like
Hmm.
my felt sense of like something feeling stuck or stopped, and like the way in which like I this body, a body is like moving differently,
Mm-hmm.
moving in a very like general broad sense.
Interesting. Yeah, when you say it that way, that makes it a fresh in a fresh for me too. There's like a yeah. How am I moving differently? Like how I'm moving differently is the same as what my stoppage is.
Hmm.
So like that, then I would instance that by saying, so like if I'm like tired or fuzzy, this is me taking that in my body, not yours. So if I'm tired or fuzzy, that's like I'm gonna be overly literal, but I don't mean it this way. It's like the interrupted functional cycle of like enough sleep. But how is that being carried? It's being carried in my exact experience of everything about what tiredness is like.
Hmm.
Um, and why is that a good example of how it's being carried? Because I can feel in my implying, whether I'm aware of it or not, on a conscious level, the desire to sleep more. Or the underutilization of cognitive resources, like automatically done by the body when you're more tired. Like your thinking is less precise. You're uh, yeah, and I want to say like there's an aspect of that is like, oh, I'm conserving energy. Would you like to take us further, Joey?
Yes. Yeah. Picking up my own stoppage. Um, Last paragraph, page 20. The differently ongoing process includes some unchanged implying, which implies the object, parentheses, the missing N2 aspect, which would resume the stopped process. The missing N2 aspect, which would resume the stopped process, close parentheses. The object is implied by the carried stoppage. And that sentence is bold, and it does feel bold in my felt sense.
Hmm.
The object is implied by the carried stoppage. It is carried by the respects in which the occurring is different, and by the respects in which the implying keeps on being the same.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, these respects are not separated, only the continuing process is separate from the stopped one.
Mm-hmm.
And these respects are not separated. The respects in which the occurring is different, the respects in which the implying keeps on being the same. I kind of like that, like seemingly paradoxical thing, something about that stuck being the same is what feels so different in my occurring.
Uh-huh. Well said. Right. Right. This is like like expanding gently what we had in 3 of like this object was not an object before. It's like the stoppage, in the stoppage there, in it becoming separate, it can be an object. And so this is playing in that field a bit, but now using a bit more the concept of processes to talk about that. And and it's weaving in object as well, but it's weaving in process a bit more. It's weaving in process. And so, yeah, exactly.
It's interesting that as I like continue reading, I'm catching myself reading it in this way of like, that occurring differently, that differently ongoing process. I'm filtering it through my maybe focusing experience, but how negatively I experience that. I just read that there's something about this like, oh, this thing is just not changing my
Mm,
process, and it just bothers me, and something feels off. My my differently ongoing process, something about it feels off. Uh,
yeah. This so there's this agitative, discomforting, whatever quality to what's not changing in your process, what's not changing in your system.
mhm,
So I'll continue just into that. So the carried stoppage is the body version of the missing object. I put it this way to remind us of the old representational way of thinking so that we can notice a carried stoppage is nothing like a copy or a representation. So I feel like pausing there already. So that feels powerful to me because on the philosophy side of things, and of course, it's all philosophy, but I think it's eminently practical too. But on the philosophy side of things, that's like bam, we're getting into discourse right there. It's like explicit discourse.
mhm,
He's pointing out that implicitly in this realm of signifiers, signified carried stoppage is nothing like a copy or a representation. It doesn't represent the word because remember, carried stoppage is the body version of the missing object, and like objects have a objects are going to become the thing that we then now point at and say it's this x, it's this y, it's that x, it's that y. Yeah.
that fascinates me.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm like rereading it. The carried stoppage is the body version of the missing object. Put it this way to remind us the old representational way of thinking so that we can notice a carried stoppage is nothing like a copy or a representation. The carried stoppage is the body version of the missing object.
Hmm.
The body version of the missing object is nothing like a copy or a representation. Hmm. Yeah, I know I have more a handle on those two phrases in this moment than I did my first reading, but they still strike me as, yeah, begging more. But my first reading has question marks next to that particular section. What?
Yes. Yes.
I'm ready for more.
Okay. For the same reason, I also want to call the carried stoppage the schema. In the old model, the term meant a kind of picture which enabled a body to recognize an object. Here, the carried stoppage fills this role so that the missing process resumes if the object occurs.
I like that. I'm fascinated.
Yes. And if there's questions about, linguistic theory and all that that implicitly pop in your philosophy filled head, Joey, remember that we have to wait for chapter 7 to actually have that discourse in earnest. Because this is the far too early.
Mhm,
This is the scare quoted schema. Or-
mhm.
right, we're not quite at no quotes schema yet.
Well, it's interesting too that he, as you mentioned, like something about him. I mentioned this way to remind us of the old representational model. Nothing like a copy or representation.
Mm.
Something about in the same paragraph to be like throwing out schema, which does kind of fire off all kinds of connections. Uh,
Mm.
Inviting this, and I'm appreciating that reminder. These kind of scare quotes of just like, is it even okay for me to use these words right now? But like, check it out. I'm making a reference through the old model.
Uh-huh. he knows it's not fully okay. That's why he scare quotes
Yeah.
it.
And it's interesting, the wording. I want to call the carried stoppage the schema.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's his own stoppage. If we think about this in terms of the model development, he's like we could almost say like, "Oh, I want to call the carried stoppage the schema."
It's something about, like, I'm thinking of focusing too, it's almost like he's acknowledging the premature cognition.
Mm.
I
Mm.
wanna throw out this thing instead of letting it speak to me. Instead of letting it be as it is, like, I'm kinda throwing a label at it, trying to make it fit.
Ah, right,
Something about,
right.
like, I have to realize something in my model of this process is telling me,
Uh-huh.
"No, stop." And I still really like it.
I really like it too. Do you wanna take us further?
Mm. Paragraph Are we calling this paragraph 3 or 2, Nicholas?
This would be paragraph 3 by my way of doing things, yeah.
So paragraph 3 on page 21. I have already said that recognize is used too early here. This resuming can happen even with plants and simple animals. We want terms for this widespread recognizing so that we can later build more elaborate terms for more developed kinds of recognizing.
Mhm.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, we know. We know.
Right, so as a clarifying note, when we use recognize, we're overcoupling that, we're bringing a lot of human association of, like, a mammalian association of recognition. One of the ways this is too early is because a process can resume, like, just reading from this paragraph, a process resuming can happen even with plants and simple animals. And do we wanna call that recognition? And so that's like, okay, no, not if we mean recognition in these particular highfalutin conceptual ways. Clearly, that's not recognition. And so that's one way that this is too early. But just to be clear, that is also not to say that we can't say that the plants recognize. It's just we're kind of starting to stratify or give different layers of meaning to the word recognition because um, from the little bit of Whitehead I've read, it's just there's a sense of like something can genuinely become more complicated and have new powers that come from that, even if that's fully congruent in some way with where things started. Like that's one way that Gendlin's philosophy, I think, interfaces with again the bit of Whitehead that I do know, which is like that's a way of saying. See, now I'm gonna do it. That's a way of saying, no, I'm gonna leave that stoppage. I have to leave it stoppage. I'm trying to respect the book. Um, I have to leave that stoppage. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it does, like, these few paragraphs, your comments, I'm just like, "Oh, I totally just read this as, like, my own focusing process."
Uh,
And then something in these comments that invites me to also, like, letting that go is the thing I'm referencing. Um,
let it what's that when you say letting that go?
my focusing experience
Uh-huh.
as a potentially, I use this with scare codes, but a schematizing, recognizing
Mm.
being.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
something about this invitation to, like, be challenged to think of it through a plant and the
Good.
way in which, like, my mind just glitches, and it's just like, "Oh, yeah, I have to kinda reinsert myself back into the stoppage." "Okay, fine.
Mm.
Come down if you stopped there. Just I don't quite get that."
You reinsert yourself. I got you, but I'm just for listener efficacy. You're reinserting yourself into the stoppage uh, because you don't quite know how to empathize with a plant's version of
Yes.
these things, and that not knowing is your feeling of stoppage too. So you're back in not knowing land. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Would you like to take the next one as well?
Mhm. So paragraph 4, page 21. We are setting up a new conception of the living body, one in which the body means or implies. So far, we have defined 3 ways in which the body implies: within body N, the next occurring, and the stopped process and object. We will now develop a fourth: when there are many processes, how they imply each other.
Mm. Goddamn. This is how you overload a term with meaning, by the way. Like, this is so fucking cool to me. I don't remember all the ways implying gets overloaded. In programming, by the way, there's something called operator overloading or multiple dispatch for methods or things like that, which I'm not going to explain. But for you programmers who ever listen to this, you'll get the reference. So I just kind of love the way that implying gets overloaded with all of these different meanings, and this term has so much power. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really hanging with that last sentence too. We'll now develop a fourth when there are many
Uh-huh.
processes, how they imply each other.
Yes. Yes. So we have a mutual implying between in environments. Um, remember how aspects of the body can be in mutual implication with aspects of the ground, for example. That's the environment number two way of things. Like, I believe that's the non representational, self reflexively same environment. Complicated vocabulary there that I would need to think into further. But so there's a way where environment implies different environment. There's a way where object and process are mutually implied. There's a way where the functional cycle implies the continuation, not just the continuation, but all the other aspects of that functional cycle as well. Because that's where we get fuzzy with timey-wiminess. So just
That's
because
the
things,
next occurring.
yeah. Just say that again, Joey.
That's the next occurring, kind of double checking myself. That's
And when you say,
functional cycles.
yeah, just keep following that one for yourself. I'll chime in when it feels right.
Yeah, I think I'm just double checking in those three ways that he's defining it. That second way, the
Mhm.
next occurring, that's referencing functional cycles. I'm asking that as a question to you.
Yes. I'm just trying to find the section. Okay, there we go. Ah, yes. See, that's so funny. It was so ingrained in me, um, that would be the case. So what I'm doing there, like, without even thinking about it, uh, is within body N is chapter 1, the next occurring is chapter 2, and the stop process and object is chapter 3, and that
Right.
was just automatic for me to the point that I didn't register that that was that's what I was doing. And so the next occurring for me, yes, exactly, is the functional cycle in chapter 2, because that's the next has a proximal sense, it has a spatial sense. It's clear to me in this sentence, it doesn't feel like it's bringing that. So next would then get its temporal sense. So the subsequent, and temporality is the chapter 2 dive, right? So we
Mhm.
open into weird ideas of how space works in chapter 1 with these very unique forms of thinking about environments. Chapter 2 opens into weird, not necessarily linear forms of time. And so what I was bringing in there wasn't just that the functional cycle implies the next occurring, that if you recall back to chapter 2, the functional cycle also implies the entirety of the functional cycle. Every aspect of the functional cycle implies the other. And then finally, we get this the third of the stoppage implies the object that was missing. The object takes on the form of everything that wasn't there for the stoppage to continue, such that in this too early sense, it can be recognized. It's recognized because the process resumes once it's there.
Mhm.
It all, like, you can almost picture this, like, this uniquely carved little chisel out of, like, this flow of something. And once the chisel's back, it can keep going. Once you slot the little puzzle piece back, but it's not one to one. Remember that too. And then to continue my torrential tangent on this, or it's not a tangent, but whatever I'm doing, we will now develop a fourth. What's the distinction there? So first off, we're really getting, we already had processes, but before it wasn't process in general, it was stopped process
Mhm.
with the third sense of implying. But now we're getting into processes, plural, and they're not necessarily stopped. And how do those imply each other is now the question. So this is beautiful to me because as I'm feeling it now, processes have a temporality to it. They have motion. They're verbing. They're these verbing things. Um, and how they imply each other gives me this cross texture. And so for me, I get space-time from this.
It's interesting, just like the subtle things that each chapter is adding. Like, I'm just liking that sentence. That's just to kind of like reflect on these kind of themes, these ways of that the body defines, the body implies.
Shall we press on?
Yeah.
If the stoppage is new, what continues has never occurred that way before, alone, without what is stopped. So, if the stoppage is new, what continues has never occurred that way before, alone, without what is stopped. Occurred that way before alone, without what is stopped. What continues may have occurred before, but if the stoppage is new, what continues has never occurred that way before because it has never been alone, because it has never been without what is stopped. This is environment zero, by the way. This is environment zero occurring into the environments that are concrete, so to
Hmm.
speak, the environments that are, so to speak, actually happening.
That's interesting.
Yeah, my phrasal trigger for that, just for people who are curious where I'm getting environment zero from, is never occurred that way before. Yeah. And so one of the things I generally seem to do with Gendlin at this point is he has a very, and it makes sense. It's right. He's writing from his felt sense that there's very particular phrases he will use, and those phrases get associated with certain concepts. And so that is one of the triggers for environment zero. Never occurred that way before. I won't go back to that part of the book, but if you're listening and are curious, go ahead and read through that section again, and you'll see something of the sort of that phraseology being carried throughout
Mhm.
that section. When you're ready, feel free to take us to the next, but no pressure to jump.
This looks like paragraph 6.
Mm-hmm.
Were there two processes before one of them stopped? They had never occurred separately before. The spectator can always divide in many ways, but let us give a different status to a division between occurrences that can occur without each other.
Beautiful. So here's another phrasal trigger for me. The spectator can always divide in many ways. So again, you hear the spectator, that means environment one. And so But the like he's clearly like segmenting that out. So what does that mean? That means we're talking about environments 2 and 3.
Mhm.
We might be talking about one of those in particular, I'm not sure, but we're definitely not talking about environment 1. And so by implying, we have environment 2 and 3 or 2 or 3. Were there 2 processes before one of them stopped? Right. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, the sense I get, he's almost saying, like, that's a spectator's question.
That's a spectator's question. We can always divide in many ways. Were there 1,000 processes before one of them stopped? And, I'm noticing here where there are 2 processes before one of them stopped. And this is, to me, almost a kind of like a callback to the subheading definition. The body, when a process stops, is what continues. It is the other process. That distinction I was noting before, where like the body actually doesn't really enter into that equation by how Genlin's defining it until there's the stopped process, weirdly. And so now in here, there's this where there are 2 processes before one of them stopped. They had never occurred separately before. So in other words, the body had never occurred separately from a process before we had a marker that there was a process that even stopped.
Mhm.
And we only know that it stopped because from an environmental 2 sense, you carried the stoppage of the functional cycle, but it's not even functional cycleness, more abstractly, it's you carried the stoppage of an implying that implied itself changed, but it wasn't. What occurred didn't change the implying as it implied itself changed. Had it, then you would have changed just fine, but without carried stoppage. And in that carried stoppage, now the question is asked, were there 2 processes? And it's opened. The question is opened because part of the answer is, in some sense, yes, but we have to be careful about what we mean by two there. There's two in that the body is the other process. But the way we have to be careful is we're I know Gendlin's not trying to get super hardcore into metaphysics, but we might want to be careful about then saying, and therefore in reality,
Mhm.
these two things were two processes before. Like that's where we're kind of letting ourselves not be so certain on purpose because we maybe don't know how continuity works. Where are you at with this one?
Yeah, I think I just leave a little bit of curiosity about giving a different status to a division between occurrences that can occur without each other. Something about different status, different than wanting to, yeah, jump to conclusions about what the nature of these processes are
Good. Good.
before outside of stoppage.
Good. 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 So now let's enter into that. Is this my paragraph?
Mhm.
Paragraph 7, page 21. Entering into that. What continues would not be new if the bold italicized, not scare quoted, two processes had already been distinct.
Nice.
In that case, the one that continues would continue unchanged. But we think of the process as undivided. What continues has never happened without what is stopped. So the division is new, and what continues is a new whole.
Nice. Yeah, I'm liking that a lot.
Mm.
Something about it as a new whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, something about it speaking to that whole, like, the way I've been reading it of, like, the differently ongoing process, the occurring that is different, I'm experiencing as, like, negative, agitating, painful, and I feel like something about this paragraph kinda, like, maybe calls some of that into question about, when I
Mm.
read things like a new
Mm.
whole, it kinda comes
Mm.
with, like, I think there's a way in which I read, like, "Oh, stopped process, ongoing process is now, like, incomplete, is now suffering." And again, maybe I'm just yeah, it's like I bounce that through my focusing experience, and, like, how much to, like, lean into and on what how I think or feel or am oriented towards,
Uh-huh.
like, the assumptions I bring to, like, why I might focus
Uh.
versus
Uh.
reading this, as what I imagine implies all of that, but also feels like, I guess I'm, like, catching this bias or privilege in me of just no stopped process. Um, all one process.
All one
Come
process.
back to the almighty process,
Come back. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
the undivided.
New hole. Only
Yeah, and
new
something about
holes.
new hole really challenges that for me, and that kinda feels, "Ooh, ah."
Yeah. And I want to get into the weeds a bit with the first two sentences, at least. What continues would not be new if the two processes had already been distinct. If we had two processes before and one of them uh, is now stopped, and then we now see the other one more clearly because it's ongoing. So, like, we're like, oh, okay. Now that one is stopped, it's obvious. Think about this scientifically. This is part of how you do good research design. It's like now that one is stopped, it's we can see the characteristics of the other one more clearly. Like almost as if to say before they were kind of influencing each other, they were muddying each other. It was hard to say when but then one stopped. The animal started. The animal has been starving for multiple days. So Genlin is saying if they had already been distinct, what continues would not be new because the one that continues would continue unchanged. Therefore, the processes had to affect one another because his definition in this model, and again, you don't have to take it as truth at first, but maybe give him the credit of designing a model that actually speaks to reality, since that's what his job is and that's what he's trying to do. So, without necessarily buying into it wholesale, thinking critically, he's already defining things straight up by saying, how does a stopped process continue? How is an unchanged implying carried? It's carried by a changed occurring. The stopped process exists insofar as what does continue is different. What does continue is the body, the other process. We're going to start getting into more processes than just the body and the process that stopped in just a moment. But what does continue carries the stoppage by being different. We have that so far. Does that track for you, Joey, that we have that so far? Or,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does. So if we have that so far, then the processes cannot have been distinct because we know that the one that continues does not continue unchanged by the way that the model is being defined. The one that continues does not continue unchanged. It continues changed, carrying the stoppage of the one that stopped. So, yeah. So we think of the process as undivided. What continues has never happened without what is stopped. That's another way of saying merely by continuing without another so called distinct process, how can you possibly even remain the same? This is yet another way of getting at it. And so it's really challenging this idea of cleanly segmenting something into a distinct process because science really wants to do that. And it's not this, to be clear, this isn't like a wrong procedure to do. But if we're getting into the nitty gritty of like, this type of philosophy here, um, at what point do you say, oh, and by the way, this theme will be expanded upon greatly. By what point do you say, oh, these things influence each other in this way, and 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 this way? At what point do you just start saying maybe these aren't distinct processes, but it's a useful schema for me to think through, for me to like, just helps me to feel like I'm isolating it because it satisfies these criteria for how I can like spatially organize something or spatially think about something. But at what point of this is influenced by X in myriad ways can we keep saying this is a distinct process to begin with? This is the tension he's playing with. Like you, yeah, we'll just keep going into that tension. So I could keep going, but we're going to get there anyway. So, yeah.
This is kind of just coming to mind, so I'll throw it in. You can decide if it's relevant or not, but um, it's making me think of the way I've heard IFS distinguished from focusing, and
Mm,
at least in classes with Sandy, something about this like part as kind of there versus as a process, um, and the way in which like maybe I'm experimentally crossing this understanding of like processes that had already been distinct with like these pre-established parts in me that I might refer to with like
right,
IFS language
right.
versus something about, for me, how focusing kind of allows them to be processes that might, struggling to find the words about the implying the occurring that's implied, um, and the way in which that will actually like change the process in the same way that what I'm reading here about when a process stops, an entirely new whole comes out of the thing that continues on.
Uh huh.
And maybe for me, that's implying that for a stopped process to become unstopped, it's not just like rejoining that pre established, undivided process, but there's a change that's occurring there too.
Uh huh. Uh huh. It's not just say that one more time. I like that and it's important. It's not just rejoining. Go on.
It's not just rejoining a process that we could consider to be now kind of restored to
Oh,
how it was
good,
before.
good. What is it rejoining then?
I would say maybe, yeah, just like a new hole. There's another new
Yeah.
hole.
Yes. Yes. We kind of got that. So we got something of that distinction in the previous chapter where basically like when the object resumes the process, the process resumes in circumstances that have potentially had a lot of time in between, potentially had a lot of change. So what it resumes into is a different body, so to speak. We could now
Mhm.
say.
Mhm.
Um, and so even if if the implying continues exact, like at that exact point of where it was unchanged and it continues forward, what it's continuing into isn't the old body that it would have continued into. It's this new whole where what continues, even though he's saying it stays exactly the same, but what continues has to be a little, somewhat different, right? Because it's not continuing in an exactly the same environment, even if what needs to happen is so to speak exactly the same. There's these subtleties, and all this like hand wringing over these like technicalities for something that's very floaty at the same time, very hard to pin down, very vague. Again, this is on some very real level, Gendlin working with defining and explaining and grappling with focusing itself in philosophically precise language. On some level, it is also always doing that. And so we have to respect the kind of beautiful unclarity that is paramount to the focusing process, and how, while some of these terms may feel, or ways of getting at things may feel very vague, I find that as I enter into them, they do kind of start resonating with me. And so there's a kind of sense and truth in something that may appear as vague or imprecise. Yeah. And there's the section that I'm thinking of. Uh, of course, this is page 15, paragraph 123. Yet when this object occurs, the whole complex process which was stopped resumes. I'll also just share from my felt sense that, like, yeah, I'm certainly grappling with some of these phrases. Like, I myself have a vagueness. Like, on some sense, I feel confident. This is familiar to me. But on another, as I enter into it, it feels true to me that, like, I really want to get it, and I'm almost riding my own waves of like my own senses of like unclarity or not quite getting it underneath the surface of like, oh yeah, that's familiar to me, or oh yeah, I've read it before. So feeling that too. Whenever you feel ready, feel free to take us further, Joey.
All right. Paragraph 8, page 21. We can also see novelty developing if we consider this. When the stopped process resumes, it will do so into a changed organism, one that went on in new ways during the stoppage. So the resumed process won't be as before either. When it resumes, there will be a new whole. The whole process won't be as it was before the separation from what continued.
Yeah. So yet again, one of those things where I sidebar for 5 minutes and the next paragraph says exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll continue.
Yeah.
Paragraph 9. What continued was different during the stoppage and is changed further by being together with what resumes the stoppage. Paragraph 10. Are there still two processes in the whole once the stopped process resumes? This question is in the old model, either one or two. Our result is more complex.
Oh, it certainly is.
Yeah, all that lands quite nicely and simply.
Mm. And for those of you who are, yeah, if you were wondering if I read this book before we start, this is a hopefully direct evidence that I don't, because I could not possibly spend that long rambling if I knew that it's just gonna say what I'm what I'm getting at right there. I definitely am kind of like blind to a lot of the paragraphs that are coming up. And the funny thing is how it keeps happening. And I swear to God, my memory is not so good that I'm like like I really do feel like this is a like an exemplification of the way that Im- like conceptual implying of a
Mhm.
further explication works. It's like as I'm following him very carefully and he's like laying out the guards, like I am getting in my body on some level a good, albeit pre-trained, but a good sense of like what is missing. And so this is hardly the first time where I'm like kind of speaking into the like what's not being said, the what's missing. And then lo and behold, it is what is then said. It is what was
Yeah,
missing now rendered present.
it's the next occurring.
Yeah, it's the it's the next occurring. I think that I don't know. There's something a little bit sweet about following a thought process clearly enough that I'm, in a sense, knowing where it's going sometimes without knowing where it's going, because we're both like working on the same edge together. We're both
Mhm.
so yeah. There you go. Intersubjectivity, a win for A win for something about that. So what do you get out of these three things? You said it fits nicely together, Joey. What's that?
I think for me, it just maybe felt validating to what we were saying before reading it. So it kind of felt like, cool.
Mm.
I didn't feel a lot of stoppage. It just felt like smooth.
Ah, smooth. Shall I continue reading?
Yeah.
Okay. The very last paragraph on page 21. If there are many stoppages and resumptions, note that we're getting many now. Okay. If there are many stoppages and resumptions, there will be many processes, i.e., many newly organized occurrences. Okay. Many newly organized occurrences. Ways the whole body is. For many processes, perhaps all, there will be phases when they occur only together and other phases which tempt us to think of them as separate processes. This result is what most people begin with coordinated processes. Instead, we derive the fact that there are many processes and that they become many in such a way that they are already coordinated. Let me show this. So he's saying it's a result. He's going to show it, but even still, we can say an aspect in which this is derived is if we just take chapter 3 as a basis. I'm not going to say how that was derived, but if we take that as a result and apply it. So chapter 3 again was saying like in the stoppage, there's a mutually implied object. The object is what would resume the stoppage. And of course, like it's a bit more nuanced than what I just said, but approximately, yes, that. Which means, and then here we have the body is what continues. The body is the other process. As soon as we have more than one process, the body is the other process, the one that is not stopped. The stopped process exists insofar as what does continue is different. It is an unchanged implying carried by a changed occurring. The carried stoppage is the body version of the missing object. If there's another stoppage, we could maybe sense that that would be another body. The body would carry that version too of the missing object. In other words, we define this whole process for one. We didn't say that it couldn't keep happening. And so now we're examining, so what happens when it keeps happening? And in that sense, it is a derivation. Rather than starting with the multiplicity, of processes, this model has carefully first defined how processes even work to begin with in chapters 2 and 3. And then now we're playing with those and exploring their manyness. If you have more thoughts about that, feel free to jump in, Joey. And the alternative is just go ahead and get into his demonstration.
Yeah. Something in me that I feel him leaning against has that kind of like, whoa, how is it that all these processes come into coordination together?
Mm, mm,
Uh,
good.
and him kind of leaning against that. Instead, we derive that there are many out of
Absolutely.
the whole already coordinated. Let me show this. Paragraph 3, page 22. In our new model, the processes are originally and inherently coordinated. In phases, when a process is resumed, the rest of the body occurs only together with it. Whenever that process is stopped, the rest of the body lives without it. So the other processes have phases during which they are always together with this one process, all one with it, not differentiated from it, and other phases during which they have gone on and formed without it.
I'm going to continue and then I'm curious to open space. The processes may seem independent along their whole sequences, but they are different processes only during phases in which one went on without the other. Only during phases in which one went on without the other. That's a very just grammatically decisive fucking phrase right there. They are different processes only during phases in which one went on without the other. When a process goes on, it goes on together with a lot of other processes. Each phase of each process developed only together with some, but only without some others. All the phases of each process developed during the stoppages of some others, and only together with some others. This paragraph is a microcosm of why I say this book gets a lot harder from chapter 4 onwards.
Yeah, it throws me for a loop.
Let's have a dialogue entering into that loop.
Something that was coming fresh reading that about processes going on, independent phases in which one went on without the other,
Good.
and the ways it feels like it leaves open the idea that processes aren't necessarily falling out of each other from stoppage, but like something, the phrase that comes from me is like split processes.
Mm.
Like a process can go on with other processes, but not a certain set or certain process.
Okay, where do you get that results? A process can go on with but not with others.
I'm hanging on the last sentence of the previous
Uh-huh.
paragraph where he says other phases during which they have gone on and formed without it. And I think I'm reading that as saying without it being the rest of the body. And
Mm.
I'm reading the body as like, that process that's still going.
Good. 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 Yes. Yeah. So I I think this is one of those pages that I probably spent like literally multiple hours just trying to keep rereading. Um, when I say multiple hours, I mean like I would read another chapter of a process model, come back here, and this would be one of those pages that I would then read for another hour again, and then go read more process model, come back to a page like this, and spend another hour reading it. And like, so I just want to give that context that I think this is one of those utterly mercilessly like brutal brutal moments for me in my journey of a process model is
Mhm.
motherfucking page 22. um so what you're pointing out feels like one of those distinctions I had been toiling over a lot, Joey. Which is, yeah, you were just mentioning on paragraph 3, like the last sentence. I'm going to read up just slightly higher. So whenever that process is stopped, the rest of the body lives without it. The rest of the body, the rest of the body. So the other processes have phases during which they are always together with this one process, with this one process, with this one process, all one with it, not differentiated from it. Now, how's that for ooey gooey? How's that for ooey gooey? All one with it, not differentiated from it, always together with this one process. What's this one process? The rest of the body that lives without it. Um, well, sorry, actually, not quite. We're talking about that process. See, this is where I get I get tangled up here. I get tangled up here. So I'll revisit to make sure I'm right. But anyways, continuing. And other phases during which they have gone on and formed without it. So it being this process that we're kind of pinning down and saying sometimes you're resumed, sometimes you stop. Um, I think what's happening here, this all feels complicated, but I think that I just need to say it in this complex way because it really is this hard on some level. I think what's happening here is we're pinning down process to be able to talk about it. We're like using our normal way of discrimination and saying like, okay, here's a process. Let's treat it as if basically it exists before and after. Let's treat it like it was there before stoppage. It's there after stoppage. It sometimes stops. It sometimes resume. We're like pinning it down to look at it conceptually. Simultaneously to that pinning and holding, we're using a model that's literally trying to not give this process this existential credence that somehow it literally does exist before and after. Like both of those are happening simultaneously. And I think this is part of what makes this such a dredge to work through is it helps generate results to use environment one thinking. Yet at the same time, there's these shortcomings of environment one thinking that Gendlin is simultaneously subverting. And I think that the effect of that, this is just my point of view. This is what's coming to me. I think that the effect of that is that we're going to have a very hard time indeed. But I think that that is part of why we're having a very hard time indeed. Is on one hand, to generate more philosophy, we need to do a thing that on the other hand, we don't want to fully grant credence to. And that creates this paradoxical type of shifting. That's my take. I'll pause for a few moments to let poor Joey, who has probably not spent a combined total of 10 hours reading this page and is still confused with it, which I am, to
I think something about like, let me show this, give demonstration, this already coordinated. Instead, we derive against this result that people want to begin with of coordinated processes. And the framing is somewhat helpful to zero out. It's something about like putting in check that like spectator in me that
mm,
wants to come and like N1
mm,
the
mm.
statements, assertions he's making, um, and the extent I would have to go to like fully put that in check. I
Uh-huh.
also feel like I can read that and be like, I'm with you. I don't need to understand fucking before after with it. Like, um, and then, yeah, there's even a way of it's like, oh yeah, like these questions are spectator questions.
Good, good,
Mhm.
good. I like that a lot, and that tracks for me. But we are also still spectators, is maybe what I would bring in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right. Because this phasal model is going to be developed so much, I think this is one of those cases where we carry our stoppage and press on into the world, and we'll find ourselves needing to come back potentially. And I think I'm just gonna maybe too early because I might be wrong. I might have just missed something that puts all of this into total clarity. But I'm gonna give this too early definition of the page 22 procedure that is now going to follow us throughout the rest of the book, where we will let ourselves carry the stoppage, and then every now and then we'll do the page 22 procedure of picking it up because we're going to have to sort through some of these tangles repeatedly. So if you feel like you have more, go on more. And if not, take us into the next paragraph,
All right.
which is still on page 22 and still part of the page 22 procedure.
So that's paragraph 5. Therefore, how any one of them is at a certain moment is part of the bodily whole that includes just certain phases of the others. We can now say,
Say it.
paragraph 6, the exact way a process is in each of its phases implies how the others are. This is a fourth sense of imply,
Bam.
is part of the bodily whole that includes just certain phases of the others.
Mm.
The exact way a process is in each of its phases implies how the others are. This is a fourth sense of imply.
Yep. Yep. So I'm getting a lot of resonance in my feeling space that I want to read that in my own voice. Therefore, how any one of them is at a certain moment, which also means at any certain moment, is part of the bodily whole that includes just certain phases of the others. Because some processes, this was where maybe an example is helpful. You need to eat, you also need to drink. In a perfect way, for the example here, it turns out that sometimes eating fulfills a little bit of the drinking. And depending on what you drink, sometimes it fulfills a little bit of the eating, depending on how nutrient rich it is. But we can also imagine that there's different functional cycles that happen, such as dehydration is the carried stoppage, is the body version of what's happening when you're not drinking water, and hunger is the carried stoppage, the body version of what's happening when you're not eating. And we could, if we want to, and we do want to, because we can help think through things, schematize those as two different processes. I'll define them by their stoppage. Hunger process, starvation process on the one hand, dehydration process, thirst process on the other. That you can imagine that there are different phases in each of those functional cycles that may be occurring while different phases of the hunger, the eating, the starvation, the not eating cycle are happening. How those phases happen, how thirst shows up, how drinking shows up, how dehydration shows up, is going to be in, we'll now use the fourth definition, implied also by how you're starved or how you just ate, or how it is in this sense. We have this very viscerally confusing to me at some moments ways where there is no real distinction between any process on some level, while simultaneously being able to talk about them as distinct. And the way that I say no real distinction is in that way where, well, actually, I want to leave that as stoppage. I hit an here, but I want to just give those two examples because the phases I think threw me off a lot, and I think you might be struggling with phases. And I just want to remember, I want us to think of phases as something that is a word that's starting to enter in as we're talking about multiple processes. And so it's helpful to understand phases by literally working through multiple processes in your head. Because only through working through multiple processes that can have their own different points of stoppage and resumption. Because remember, the hunger process can be stopped in many ways if you want to play through it. Like you can, or the whole functional cycle around eating. Like you might be stuck not being able to defecate for one reason or another. That's a different place of stoppage than not finding food, for example. Notice how you might still be drinking water the whole time. And so notice that those are different phases that are co-occurring, right? Water drinking is sometimes happening only together with being able to defecate, and is sometimes happening only together with not being able to defecate. I don't know if that brings anything for you, Joey. Thanks for being such an attentive listener to my babbling.
Yeah, I think I'm following it. I think it makes
Okay.
sense to me. I think thinking along the functional cycles and that example of hunger, defecation versus lost food,
Right.
tracks. And I was also rereading it past and through the initial first time he drops the fourth definition of implying, where he says, when there are many processes, how they imply each other. And it just struck me the word when stands out now that we've gone through these loopy paragraphs.
What location is that again? So I could visit it. The when.
That's paragraph 4 on page 21. We will now develop the fourth. When there are many processes, how they imply each other. Something about that plugged into this conversation of like, it does seem significant that that's when and not that.
And not that.
It's not that he's asserting like, there is surely many processes that are somehow coordinated.
Right. Right. It is when there are many processes, which gives this feeling of emergently, like when it emerges such that there are many processes. And then I'll read into that there top of 22, first paragraph, there will be phases when they occur only together, and other phases which tempt us to think of them as separate processes. Again, already they tempt us to think of them because definition, this is the paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. The exact way a process is in each of its phases implies how the others are. This is a fourth sense of imply. Implies how the others are. In that sense, there's no separation between an ongoing process and a stopped process. In that sense.
Nice.
In that sense. The paragraph 4, the process may seem independent. The processes may seem independent along their whole sequences, may seem. Now sequences, let me give that a concrete reality. When I was giving the example of the like hunger, starvation, thirst, dehydration, I was giving examples of how those functional cycles sequence. I was going over their sequence of implyings because the implyings, though simultaneously nonlinear, also have an ordering to them. There is temporality, there's time, there's a sequence to it. And so because of that sequencing, we can have different sequences of functional cycles occurring only together with the body, only together with the one, while stoppage is happening in different parts of another functional cycle. And each of those parts, I almost want to say, of stoppage is an example, again, just to bring it back, of a different phase. So just keeping that vaguely in mind, These processes may seem independent along their whole sequences, but they are different processes. They are different processes only during phases in which one went on without the other. So they are different processes at times, only during phases in which one went on without the other. Now, what that's bringing to me is this. I'm going to spectator this. By being able to see what happens when someone gets hungry, we're learning something about the difference th- between that and what happens when someone is thirsty. But how are we learning how it's different? Only together with everything that is occurring. And see, that's part of the problem. How do you learn the impact of the variable? Only by the entire ongoing oneness of the body.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of how this is so tricky to work through, is in some sense we can separate it and we can say, oh, this process is not going. And continuing to read it, when a process goes on, it goes on together with a lot of other processes. Each phase of each process developed only together with some, but only without some others. So already there, I want to just give this definition that could be wrong. What he's saying, I think, is each phase of each process developed only together with some, but only without some others. With the word phase, what we're doing here is we're saying a phase of a process is that which happens precisely in correlation with stoppage. Every different version of stoppage defines a new phase. So in my opinion, how I interpret phase is as this kind of explosive quality. And I say explosive because there's so many, where every conceivable stoppage difference is in everything you want to call a process, as long as that thing that you're saying, oh, that's a process. Like, oh, hunger, when the animal, like the functional cycle of eating, and the animal is following as it implied itself changed, that every single part of that entire cycle is generating a phase every single time something else is in stoppage. And in fact, the only reason we even know there's different phases to that functional cycle, I almost want to say on some weird level, is because there can be stoppage at any point along the hunger process. And so every place there could be stoppage is a different potential place of a phase emerging. And every time there's a phase, then every other process you can point to has its own unique phase associated with when that's happening. And when another process is stopped at this other unique point in its functional cycle, then and that at the same time another process is stopped at a unique point in its functional cycle, that's not only a unique phase, it's a unique phase for every single other process that's ongoing, which is because it's occurring only together with those. See, that's what makes this so painful, is because I think it really does need to get this technical. Each phase of each process developed only together with some. What it's saying there is the moment that a certain stoppage is resumed, then it's occurring only together with those things, but only without some others. And so I want to say, as like a matrix, I'm sorry, I feel like this is my madman mode. I'm just getting crazy with it because I'm trying to grasp how wide I feel this is. It's like you'd almost need to make a matrix of every possible, in an environment one sense, as a specter of every possible configuration of everything you call a process. And every time you blip one, every time you turn one off, that literally generates a phase for every other process in your entire matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Every possible configuration generates a phase for every other possible process that's occurring only together with it and only together without it. I think it's that intense. And I feel overwhelmed by that. But I can't quite reconcile the language any other way.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah,
Yeah, I'm sitting continuously with the image of the hunger, the thirst, and even not even to pair or to situate hunger and thirst is one thing, but even to pair like the many processes I would consider happening in hunger that I'm tempted to like, describe as different things. Um, I have my own kind of felt sense, vague understanding of phases. I think the way you just put it at the end struck me as interesting. Something about when a process stops. generates a phase for all the other processes that are continuing. That feels kind of like vague and fuzzy to me, and I'll hold that. And the other image I'm playing with, which feels fun for me, is like something about
Mm.
like music and like a symphony that's playing together. A way in which like it feels all too easy to be like, well, of course, those are like different instruments and different people that are playing at the same
Mm.
time and coordinating
Mm.
themselves together.
Mm.
Um, but potentially to like abstract out of that and my like listening experience of music. Maybe that's not always how I experience it. And to kind of like take that as primary. Um, and to think, yeah, like how do I cross this understanding of phases into that? Um, how is my understanding of
Beautiful.
a phase of like one component, one instrument sound, necessarily implies kind of what's going on in the other
Yes.
components or in the song as a whole.
Yes, and I think that's the metaphors that you have is so beautiful, but I also feel like that's where it breaks down at the same time is the is like we'd have to do something where it's more improvisational classical music. It can't be based on a script, first off, because there has to be a responsiveness.
So it's interesting you say that because I was I was trying to get around that exact thing, and I was just like, and I don't make music, but in my head I was just like, how is the person creating like a symphony? Like how is that being written?
Mm,
And in my head, like something about that kind of responsiveness of somebody,
good.
and I was just, speculating what that mindset would be
There we
like how that's
there we
occurring.
go. That clarifies it for me, and that feels like that exactly tracks, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the creation of the symphony, like the cogitating, the feeling, the writing it down, the
Mhm.
right,
Mhm.
there's we're going to get to a subsection where that's going to we're gonna get exact language for that process, in fact, coming up soon. But yeah, that speaks to me what's happening here. That speaks to me what's happening here. Um, if I can run with that and give the poor listener who has not read this a lot and potentially, uh, you know, um, some more feeling sense of the very abstract and kind of crazy way I'm trying to get at this, and I still might be wrong, but I'm trying, is like when you're constructing a symphony, as one does, um
Listeners, if you haven't done this, go do it.
I'm trying to feel that phases in the construction of like hearing like the flute, right? Like hearing an instrument like a flute, and then hearing it, feeling it, feeling it with the cello, feeling it with the whole string section, he and getting a sense, "Oh, does that fit in? Does that fit in?" And this way where each of these components has its meaning, like, if you've really listened to, much classical music at all, but this is probably generalizable, like, when an instrument is used only together with other instruments, it's like the texture of it differs. How something comes across can genuinely change depending on how other things are meeting with it. And in that sense, it's a phase. So like the flute with cello and string section has a phase, but the flute with another instrument that's kind of giving an octave and another instrument giving a harmony to it, like flute doesn't quite have the same fluteness anymore. It's it has a different phase of fluteness. A really good example is there's a really well-known piece. There's a really well-known piece, and I can't remember it. And then Ryuichi Sakamoto, one of the best musicians ever, has an orchestral piece called Blue, BLU. It's like 6 minutes long. I strongly recommend listening to it because it's gorgeous. But it's following what that original piece had in some way, where the way that the instruments layer like changes the timbre of the sound of the instruments. And so there's like unique sounds that are created only through the interaction of like the simultaneity of these things. And it's a beautiful Blue is a perfect example of like these phases of a lot of stuff is repeating. A lot of sections repeat. The whole song is structured as this like building thing with the same motif over and over. But the way the phases interact change the entire texture of it. And so I almost want to help us get at the feeling of what it means to say the phases of each process develop during the stoppage of some others, and then only together with some others. So only together in the stoppage versus only together with, that there's a unique quality to the entire arrangement in those differences. So the moment a new phase comes in with certain instruments playing, the entire texture of all the instruments changes. And so that's part of what I mean by generating a new phase, is that there's a way that instruments only become known as what they are by what's interacting with it, because they're creating unique, beautiful sounds that we can simply conceptualize as, oh, that's a flute. But actually, if you listen to it, it's not really. It's a flute with the bassoon, with the clarinet, like all harmonizing in this powerful way that creates a unique sound, a unique phase that wasn't there with the instrument before. I hope that that gives some flesh. And thank you, Joey, for bringing in that metaphor. But for me, it gives a little bit more flesh for this stoppage in me that I'm continuously etching out into some aliveness. But it still feels hard for me. This still feels very hard for me to feel like I hold this with comfort, this section. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting fleshy for me,
Mm, mm.
especially the sentence you just read, like just appreciating rereading that. All the phases of each process develop during the stoppage of some others, and only together with some others.
So I think the next paragraph um, could be a good place to wrap up depending on how we feel. And I think it will also generate some good discussion. So go ahead and take that when you're ready, Joey. And that would be paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Right. Paragraph 722. It is an empirical question whether all processes imply each other in this way, or just which ones do, or what should be considered a process. We are not saying that two processes cannot be independent, even if our model so far does not formulate such independence. The empirical intricacy can always again exceed any conceptual model. Once we know this, we can use many models.
Yeah. So that casts into relief that I'm really trying to make the conceptual model cohere in earnest, which I think is a holy service on some level. But at the same time, Gendlin is giving us the most holy thing, which is to remember that, the implicit is always broader than any conceptual model can get at. It's an empirical question. He's putting back towards a source of truth. He's saying, like, whatever we schematize, whatever our model is, at the end of the day, like, actually, it's not a theoretical question whether this works. It's an empirical question.
Hmm.
Like, if you show something's independent, it's independent, right? You'd have to show that it is, but if you do, then you've done it. So the empirical intricacy can always again exceed any conceptual model. And then also, though, importantly, before that, he says, we're not saying that two processes cannot be independent. So Gendlin's taking the strong stance here. Hey, I'm building a model. Hey, I'm actually not saying two processes can't be independent. I'm letting that be actually an empirical question. I just want to clarify for y'all that that's actually empirical, and I'm letting that stand. But also, our model so far does not formulate such an independence. So I'm not schematizing it that way, actually. In my model, actually, see, that's what I want to say is in his model, they're not independent. And that's part of why I'm like working out this way of thinking about things where there is no such thing as independence. And yet he undercuts it at the same time by saying, at the end of the day, empirical intricacy can exceed. There's a wider reality. Once we know this, we can use many models. Now, why, though, might his model not formulate the independence? This maybe now makes this paragraph not the best stopping point. I'd love us to continue reading just a bit further, because Gendlin's going to now discuss the why. It can kind of give an implicit justification for why the model's leaning in this direction, though. Why we're toying with it on this end of the fence. And do you want some more time to think or feel before we move on? I'll take the next paragraph when we're ready.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is now paragraph 3, 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll probably take both 8 and 9. On page 22, when one defines separated processes or bodily systems, their interactions can be puzzling. They are often much more coordinated and affect each other mutually in more ways than one can account for. Then, quote, holistic, unquote, medicine seems to be outside of science. Once a process has become differentiated by not going on during some phase of another, there we go, the clarity, differentiated by not going on during some phase of another, one is tempted to trace them as if they were separate, even in the phases in which they occur only together. You might be tempted. But let us not assume separate processes when they are not separate from each other all along their way. Page 23. I'm going to keep going. Sorry. Paragraph 1. Maybe not sorry. Does that feel right for you, Joey? Should I continue? Should I pause? I'll pause.
Continue.
Continue? Okay. The spectator could formulate complete and distinct strings of separate processes. For example, digestive, respiratory, reproductive, etc. Note the use of strings. I might have accidentally misused sequence a little bit, but string sequence, we're going to keep playing with those. The spectator could formulate complete and distinct strings of separate processes. For example, digestive, respiratory, reproductive, etc. These are not separate all along their way, nor are there sub-process at the microscopic level. What does it mean to say they're not separate? If you've studied any anatomy and physiology, we're constantly talking about how one system interacts with the other, how one system's sub-process is used in the other, and the immune system works this way with the circulatory system. And what Gendlin is saying, these are not separate processes all along the way. They are not separate all along the way, nor are there sub-processes, nor are aspects of them like, this aspect of the circulatory system, this aspect of the reproductive system. At the microscopic level, even separate all along the way. This is his claim. The illusion, next paragraph, paragraph 223, page 23. The illusion of separate processes arises also in studying social change. For example, one traces changes in work patterns over time. Then, separately, one traces changes in family patterns, in health patterns, in economic patterns. Different terms are developed in these different studies, as if these lines of development existed separately over time, when in fact, they are often merged in each event that people live through. Paragraph 3. If one assumes separate events, processes, or systems, one must then add their coordinations as one finds them, as if unexpectedly. Currently, science is only slowly finding more and more kinds of them, more and more kinds of these coordinations, correlations. It turns out that this impacts this. Studies show that this thing that you do for your bodily health actually affects this thing about economics, and correlation is not causation, so it's probably the latter and the former. But anyways, the point is that I have always taken this section to say, so why not stop being surprised and just start? There we go, actually. That's my cohesive conclusionary statement here. Let's instead not be surprised that a more coordinated connection keeps being found. Let's instead not be surprised that, it turns out the circulatory system has this unique, newly found interaction with the reproductive system that explains so much. Let us start on the side of saying it always affects each other the entire time, the whole way through. It always occurs only together in different phases as one. When the process resumes, let's actually not assume that it's a separate process when it's resumed, which actually by implication is saying nothing is actually quite separate. And then say it's an empirical question if things are independent. Prove it, that's fine. Exceed the conceptual model, that's great. But actually, nonetheless, I'm going to start our thinking on the side of it's probably all connected anyways. That's kind of how I read this. Let me start my thinking by saying it all goes together, it all slots together, it all explains each other, it all implies the other. That's where we're going to start. And then we'll leave it to empirical science to prove that it doesn't. I should now shut up for about 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm holding some stoppage around the like empirical question, conceptual model. I'm okay with that. The sentence that rings out from that paragraph, the empirical intricacy can always again exceed any conceptual model. Once we know this, we can use many models. Something
Mhm.
about why this or that model comes and resonating some with your stringing together of we might not be surprised when dot dot dot. We need
Mhm.
not be surprised when dot dot dot.
Mhm.
Something about this like reference to holistic medicine seems to be outside of science. Something about this family patterns, health patterns, economic patterns, different studies.
Mhm.
Something about this tendency to throw out into these kind of like separate processy a model that kind of validates or encourage like isolating all these separate processes. And with a kind
Uh-huh.
of question that comes out of that, just like, why do we do that? What does that serve? Both on a like utility level and on some sort of like kind of like existential,
Good. Yeah.
um, kind of like not utility, but more like epistemological. And I guess when I say that, not even necessarily that my knowing in a certain way allows me to make use of it, but more so just like I want certainty about something. I'm grasping after it in a certain way to ensure that even if it doesn't give me any utility. Uh, those are kind of some
Good.
questions that come up about this like temptation. It feels like exciting. Like there's an exciting about
Uh-huh.
this like constant tracing out different processes
Uh-huh.
on a microscopic level, on an economic level. If one assumes separate events, processes, systems, one must then add their coordinations as one finds them, as if unexpectedly. Oh, what? And who would have thought? Everything we thought we knew has changed now that we realize this sub process is doing this.
Yeah.
That's me speaking freshly into all this.
Yeah.
I'm kind of enjoying the pool of things to pick from in those last 5 paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah. And to tap onto what you're saying, what comes for me is kind of like we can have many models. Empirical reality is greater. Maybe this model's pretty good. Let's use it. No, economics is not different than the circulatory system, is not different than uh, cell biology, is not different than neuroscience, is not different than um, psychology, sociology, geology, geopolitics. Now, his model is not literally saying this, he's giving an example. But can we feel, I can feel the mutual implying between these things as if to say, like, how reality unfolds touches every aspect of this. Like, we change the soil by living on it in societies. Different political regimes have different impacts on how societies are laid out, splayed out, how people feel, how people act. It affects the way that the rocks of the earth literally are. Um, and the way that the rocks of the earth are have consequences for how you build on them. And just to say that all reality is present all the time. And we have all these lenses for being able to do deep dives on these aspects of realities. But if we use the model I want to say says to use a process model, one of the things we do here is we say, I'm not going to be surprised anymore. And how can you not be surprised?
That's interesting.
You, right. You cannot be surprised by baking in the assumption the whole way through all the time when you're considering problems. And I don't know how to do that necessarily, but it's an invitation I almost feel of saying, like, no, on every level, every discipline is going to cross through this in some way. Some might be more relevant to the circle I'm looking at right now, because I'm drawing a circle and focusing on an area. And so some might feel more relevant here. But as I move the circle around and widen and narrow it, everything's relevant.
Mhm.
everything's playing in. The influence might increase or decrease supposedly and sometimes, but it's all there. The whole thing is there the whole way through. Is almost what I want to say there. Big claim, actually. Big like.
Yeah, I'm holding on to that pretty tightly. Something about let us no longer be surprised. The invitation to welcome, allow, affirm these implications, implyings when studying a supposedly seeming independent process. Something about studying one or attempting to move one for ourselves.
What's the one referring to?
Something of stuckness, some aspect of stoppage, say in like a focusing process. For me to be looking at something and catch myself almost maybe with like a something that prevents me from being able to meet a stop process that says like surely it couldn't be connected to that dot dot dot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Assuming it
is.
was, yeah, like offered to me externally or something, but there's the whole like, oh my goodness, the
Oh,
element of surprise that comes against
oh,
maybe
that's
the
so
assumption of like
interesting.
surely it couldn't have been.
Right, but actually, it's always no wonder.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah, I really like that crossing back to focusing there. Absolutely. I think it's actually kind of shocking how, um but like in the healing arts, in the realm of like psychotherapy and all various other types of healing, body work, the holistic energy work, this, that, the other. I think it's kind of shocking how at the end of the day, people are dealing with X, Y, and Z problems, and when they meet up with the right practitioner, that practitioner is helping them along. It is giving some of those stopped processes the implying as it implied itself changed. And like all of these things are looking so different. And I think there's just myriad ways of schema of like that's why it's not a one-to-one mapping. What the how the implying implies itself changed is like one other way I get to this and feel in this moment is just that like it's actually kind of shocking how much works.
Mm.
But maybe the reason it's so shocking is because we think too poorly about how unbelievably interlaced
Yeah.
everything is.
Yeah. The other like edge comes of just like a, I don't need to look at that. That has like not the necessarily like, oh, it couldn't have been connected to that. But when my process might reveal that it's connected to that, even
Mm,
something about like, oh no, I need to focus on this thing. That is just insignificant stuff.
yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, the like how true that feels in my I mean, I think SE applies here too. Somatic experiencing of just following something bottom up and having no clue and maybe
Mm,
as insignificant as it feels or seems. Surely that can't be the crux of my life. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, the energy that comes with like, oh, I thought I was just, following some little. It's something about like the phenomenon of just like, "Oh, I had this, like, silly dream the other day," and then, like,
Uh,
30 seconds later, you're like, "Oh, shit, I'm talking about most
uh,
personal issues I could possibly talk."
right, exactly, or the way that, like, I'm super neurotic about how books are organized on the shelves, and then, like, 5 minutes later, it's like my mom was hitting me in the memory and this, that, and it has nothing to do with books, but it's exactly related to it's just like yeah, psychotherapy, baby, it's just
Yeah,
that's the name of the game.
like, as
That's
if
the
I
name of the
couldn't be
game.
talking about my life in all its complex entanglement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Gendlin as maximalist, and, like, we'll keep having to come back to this and examining it. Like, he is a rigid thinker, and he'll say, like, "I'm not an all is oneist. I want to be clear. I'm not an all is oneist. He won't say it in those terms, but he'll say it closely. But he's certainly some kind of maximalist where,
That like
yeah,
thought comes when you're like, or the ooey gooeyness about stuff. It does make me like curious as we go through, like kind of where that finds its limits.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Well, may I go just a slight bit further? Okay. I think pinning things down and using spectator thinking, I feel like I'm like kind of happy about the painful, because it came out of so much stoppage and confusing feelings, both in the past and in the present, trying to describe it. Thing of I was being like distinguishing of like, I think Gendlin is like both pinning something and holding it and like saying, hey, a process before, process after, and then subverting that at the same time in how he's actually building his model, where it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's like in my example, I'm saying one thing and then, but then I'm denying it in these. I think it's just, I think it's generative. I think it's generative to not be ooey gooey. And I think that's why Genlin isn't ooey gooey. I mean, no, but I think that that's one of the positive ways that Genlin's not commitment to ooey gooeyness is important. Is like all one does not give you nearly as much to work with as we can distinguish things as separate. We have this ability to know as humans that we pick things apart. We say a process, these processes, this or that. But the problem is that we constantly get surprised at how these things are coordinated. So I want to say, I'm not saying Genlin's saying that the reality is that they're all coordinated because there's all this fundamental oneness. But if we just go with fundamental oneness, what philosophy do we have to talk about? Well, potentially a lot. But what philosophy do we have to talk about that can reconcile and contend with and be in relation to environment one thinking? You have to leave from all oneness and come back into playing with the myriad forms of things, the specific instances. And I think that's part of where the generativity of this model happens. Is it's actually this beautiful model that I want to almost say is at the threshold, right in between our capacity to schematize things and create separate things, and oneness, where there is no separation and everything affects everything else. And I think, and I want to say what Gendlin is doing is he's asserting that actually truth is going to be more on the side of it's all connected for the purposes of this model. That's going to be our marker of truth. And from that marker of truth, we're going to talk about distinctions and distinguishment
Mhm.
and all that. And that's part of what's going to make it confusing. Because every time we're going to do a distinction, we're going to be like, oh, yeah, because that's our normal way of thinking about things. The entire goddamn analytic philosophical American tradition is based on distinctions as reality, concept as. And that's, I think, maybe part of why this stuff gets messy, starts feeling messy, is
Mhm.
precisely because we want to play with both. We want to use both. I do want to talk about distinctions. I do want to be precise, but the ground of truth is more on the oneness direction than not. So every time I define something as precision, I have to bring it back to how it's ooey gooey. But I will absolutely not say that no, it's all just one and there's no distinctions, because that, to use Genlin's earlier line of reasoning, because that denies something that's clearly empirically true about human beings, which is not only do we have a symboling power, but we use create distinctions and
Mhm.
pin things down with our symboling. We do this. So we have to be able to articulate this in a way that makes it real, because we live in that. So thanks for listening. So that's my way of saying all oneness as the default in a way that's inclusive of the truth and reality that there are distinctions. And what does that look like? It means no surprise that they're coordinated. It means only together. It means, as we're going to get to in a few moments, originally interaffecting and coordinately differentiated. It means as we pin down and grab singular things, as we pretend that economics is our lens and there's nothing else in the whole world, we're reminded that economics is coordinately differentiated, as we'll come to see, from every other field of study, because it's all instancing the one whole of reality. So that lets us talk about distinctions, use precision, be in precision land, but carrying with us the larger whole that we have to admit is there on some level. I want to say, I don't think Genlin's going to say it in those words or make that claim, but I want to say we have to carry that if we want to be realistic. So it lets us it lets us make our science in a way that can keep the truthfulness of interconnection at the same time. I want to say
Mhm.
that. I want to say that. Like, dislike, hate, love. Where are you hearing my last rant, Joey? Thanks for letting me push it to that extra bit. Where, how do you want to wrap us? Reflect.
Yeah, I think the intellectual side of me that I watched like poke its head in these last few pages kind of was coming about something about these questions of like body, process, stopped process, the other, um, and wondering like how it would crop up, but especially in your last share, something about like I found myself, yeah, mm, the first page and the second page thinking about just like this is interesting to think about like potentially I'm jumping into these layers in the same way that it might be too early to use schema and recognize, but to kind of consider about like self and identity and
Great.
individuality, like that stuff was dropping out for me quite heavily.
Oh, hell yes.
And like, yeah, something about like how can I like conceptualize my being different from these like objects
Oh,
around me and other process organisms, bodies around me. So I caught myself just like contemplating some of that more broadly. And I think like tying it back around to these conversations about like oneness and distinctions, which for me, like, yeah, borders into like, the theological, um,
yeah. Yeah.
in a way that kind of just feels like, yeah, like that pulls me, pulls at certain strings in my body, soul, heart.
Mm,
Uh, but yeah,
mm,
something about considering this like to jump layers and add all kinds of what I'd imagine are complications with um, from this body and other processes, stop
mm,
processes. How might this does this plug into a sense of identity
mm.
and myself experiencing myself as distinct from the world and the people around me. So those are some of my bigger reflections.
I love that. I love that. And we don't flat deny it, as we were talking about in the past 2 episodes. Like, we're not gonna flat pretend like we don't already have all these things. At the same time, we build this model that needs to work up progressively to be able to speak to them. So we have the lure. We
Mhm.
have the lure of, like, what we wanna talk about, and we know it's real the whole time, and we have to know it's real the whole time, otherwise our model will fail to speak to its reality. So, right, we have to bake that in on some level, and yet we haven't derived it yet. We have to let it continue. So, yeah, that's where we're at. I too wanna get to self. I too wanna get to,
Mhm.
uh, uh, the theological questions.
Mhm.
We might let our model develop a bit further while at the same time keeping that together. Like, you have to hold. I love. Anyways, Gendlin talks about the kinds of thinking that he learns from different philosophers and like carries with him in his writing, and maybe like, oh, that was a Kantian move. Like, oh, yeah, and I. Now Gendlin might have like got this from some other people and like he carries it in his own way, but what I just said feels like a very genuine kind of thinking. It's like, let's start with the reality we want to speak to that we love, and we hold that as a lure, ever there, the self, the theological, all this. And we give our Aristotelian, like, little precise model, and we let it choo
Yeah.
choo all the way back to all the way up to that, and we hold both simultaneously. And my God, Ian McGilchrist would be so proud of this man had he read a process
Mhm.
model. He's still alive. He still could, because I feel like this is just the utter profound exemplification of like the kind of right hemispheric, holistic leadership of like, let's talk about real life. Let's talk about real experiences. Let's talk about the actual humanness of things. Then with the left hemispheric divisioning and precisioning and conceptualization, and that this whole process is based upon you always using those simultaneously, the lure of reality and the conceptualization that helps us precision it and play with it and understand it. It's beautiful. It's really profound to me. So, my God, I love this. I love this book.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Do you do you feel complete here, Joey?
I do. I do feel complete.
Well, thank you for doing this with me. This was really what even was it? It was something.
Yeah, no, it was fun. I appreciated the online. Uh, worked for me. I still feel that kind of like immersive headspace, and yeah, I think I got a lot out of it. Very excited.
Yeah, very excited. So until next time, take care. Great to be with you, and thank you for listening, listeners.
See y'all.
Bye bye.